The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly.
Order. I call Elliot Colburn to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Efford, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And on behalf of the Petitions Committee, I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 611810 relating to the commercial breeding for laboratories. If I could start, Mr. Efford, by reading out the prayer of this petition, which states, and I quote, "Revoke all licences, brackets PEL, for commercial breeders of laboratory animals. Require all project licences, brackets PPLs, applications to be reviewed by an independent non-animal methods or NAMS specialist committee. Revise section 24 of ASPA 1986 to allow review and urge international regulators to accept and promote NAMS. We believe that the use of animals is scientifically, ethically, morally and financially, brackets taxpayer funded, unjustifiable. Defined in 1959, UK law enshrines the principles of the 3 Rs. The UK must now abandon these old principles and focus on development and use of non-animal methods. Having an independent NAM specialist committee review applications for project licences or PPLs prior to their approval, so that a licence is only granted if there is no replacement methods. Commercial breeders of laboratory animals are for profit rather than animal welfare focused." Now, this petition received over 102,000 signatures and counting, including 144 from my own Carshalton and Wallington constituency. And can I begin by thanking the petition creators for taking the time to come and speak to me about why they set up this petition and why they thought it was so important, everyone who signed the petition, and particularly the interest from the public gallery this afternoon. Now, the inspiration for this specific petition, whilst it is, of course, very broadly focused on the policy of animal testing, really was related to an individual case, which I'm sure many honourable members will want to reference throughout the course of their speech. But, of course, that is about the ongoing peaceful protest organised by Camp Beagle of a laboratory just outside of Cambridge. Activists have been sitting outside the MBR Acres site in Cambridgeshire for just about over 18 months now. And this petition is another way of supporting those who are trying to raise awareness on the issue of commercial breeding and animal testing. The petition creator also took the time to tell me that this is also a first step in a campaign to try and change the law so that animals in facilities like MBR Acres could be protected by the Animal Welfare Act instead of the Animal Scientific Procedures Act, which they are currently under. Now, there's a lot of interest in this debate, so I will try to keep my remarks as brief as possible so that everyone can have their say. But I'd like to start by setting out the scene of the current regulations and processes for animal testing in the UK before talking about the asks of this petition in a bit more detail. The Animal Scientific Procedures Act of 1986 requires research establishments to use scientifically satisfactory non-animal methods wherever possible. And the precept of my speech is the fact that this requirement is not being enforced or regulated properly. The UK legal framework should ensure the accordance with the principles of the 3 Rs, which stand for replacement, reduction and refinement. Under the law, a licence cannot be granted to a testing laboratory unless the Home Office is satisfied that a non-animal approach could not give the desired scientific answer. Now, applicants are asked as part of this process to demonstrate that they have considered non-animal alternatives to the animal test that they are proposing to do. But in reality, this is treated more like a box-ticking exercise, providing the only most cursory information, for example, how opportunities to replace animal testing with non-animal methods were considered. The application is then evaluated by one of a very small number of inspectors, a medical doctor or veterinarian who was not necessarily an expert in that area of testing, and inspectors often actually have a background in animal testing themselves. But the reality is that applications are very, very unlikely to be refused. And in fact, according to some research, no licences were refused for animal experimentation between 2018 and 2021. And this is a problem because analysis of licences granted during the first half of 2020 showed that researchers often failed to adequately explain their strategy in searching for non-animal methods. In one instance, there was an example of an application where only a one-word answer was given on the application. So simply put, Mr. Efford, the legal framework to uphold this principle of the 3 Rs is clearly not being effectively enforced, and the implications for this cannot be overstated. A very shocking statistic that I came across in preparing for this debate was that just last year in 2021 there were over 3 million scientific procedures that were conducted on animals, and as if that number wasn't large enough, that's actually an increase on the year before, an increase of 6%. Now, the use of dogs, for example, had an increase in 3%, cats by 6%, horses by 29%, and monkeys by 17%. Now, I can only speculate on why these increases occurred, and I would like to ask the Minister, as part of her speech, whether or not she has any data that she can share, whether the Home Office has collected as to the reasons of this increase. But I also would just like to make the comment that this seems counterproductive because, of course, only a small proportion of our animal experiments are conducted to satisfy regulatory requirements. In 2021, again, around 21% of experimental procedures fell into this category. That's a really low number. And a recent report from the Animals in Science Regulation Unit has described deeply troubling animal welfare failings in British laboratories between 2019 and 21, indeed many of which I'm sure colleagues would have been sent videos, pictures and links to, especially regarding the MBR Acres site in Cambridgeshire. Now, these have included a non-human primate dying after becoming trapped behind a restraint device, boxes of 112 live rats being moved in error to a compactor where they were crushed alive, and numerous incidents of animals being left without food or water. Now, it is my view that the UK cannot claim to have high standards of animal testing welfare when we allow animals to die of starvation, suffocation, or asphyxiation, whether they're used for testing or whether they become one of the numbered surplus that gets slaughtered every year. And just to give you some numbers on this, Mr. Efford, in 2017, 1.81 million animals were either bred for laboratory use and discarded as surplus, or killed for their body parts to be used for testing. Now, on a more positive note, Mr. Efford, the number of procedures being carried out by commercial organisations has indeed fallen, whilst the number of procedures committed by medical schools has risen. For example, in 1988, 60% of procedures were commercial compared to just 27% in 2020. However, no information is published about which establishments are primarily engaged in the breeding and creating of genetically altered animals as opposed to experimental procedures. And the government stopped publishing detailed information on procedures by establishment type in 2021. Now, this means we don't know how many surplus animal deaths there truly have been. And that is animals bred only to be killed without any testing, just to be very clear. Now, this was an EU regulation which, since leaving the European Union, the UK is not required to publish, relating to the number of animals that die within this, the system but that haven't undergone any testing procedures. Currently, Mr. Efford, aside from the annual publication of non-technical summaries for projects granted licences for regulated animal research procedures, the Home Office is not obliged to release any other details of licence applications. some information actually is prevented from release under Section 24 of the Animals Scientific Procedures Act of 1986. And the lack of transparency here is concerning, because despite a government consultation way back in 2014 to consider amending this piece of legislation that I'm referring to, no action has been taken since that point, and the consultation results still remain unpublished. Now, Section 24 prevents an open debate and wider scientific scrutiny of the use of animals in research, so I hope that the Minister can update us on the government's position regarding the future of the use of Section 24. I will gladly give way.
I thank him for giving way and for setting out what is an extremely important issue in the House of Commons. Would he agree with me that it is extremely important that the work that is taken forward is based upon evidence, and as such we should have a public scientific hearing as called for in my early day motion 278, with support from Peter Egan, Ricky Gervais and the Betsy Beagle campaign, which looks at, yes, we must take this issue forward, but it has to be as a basis in science and a scientific hearing to find the evidence base for the way forward.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for her intervention, and I do absolutely agree, and indeed the petition, in the prayer of this petition, it states for the establishment of a non-animal methods committee to look into this very issue, and I do hope that we hear some positive remarks on that. I want to expand a little bit, Mr. Efford, if I may, on the number of animal laboratory inspectors, because this number remains very, very low indeed, just 23 full-time equivalents in 2021. Now, this is particularly concerning for the fact that the vast majority of non-compliances continue to be self-reported rather than discovered through a series of inspections. And indeed, last year, the Chief Executive of the RSPCA resigned from the Animals in Science Regulation Unit, citing concerns about the lack of in-person visits to animal testing sites by inspectors. So with so many procedures taking place, again, over 3 million in 2021, but so few inspectors and so much self-reporting, it leads one to question whether the picture of animal testing welfare in the UK is actually accurate. So I'd appreciate, again, if the Minister could provide us with some more information on the steps the government is taking to increase the number of inspectors, because surely 23 full-time inspectors are looking at over 3 million procedures cannot be enough. I'll gladly give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and he presents a very worrying situation with so few animal inspectors. Now, the UK used to lead the world when it came to animal testing, having banned animal testing cosmetics some 15 years before the EU. Does he agree with me that we should use this opportunity to once again make the UK a world leader by banning animal testing and make sure the NAMS comes forward?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention, and he's absolutely right. Indeed, the UK has indeed led the way, as he rightly mentioned, on banning the use of animals for cosmetic testing, for example, and indeed, even just in this Parliament, we've passed so much animal welfare legislation, but this does seem to be a glaring omission that I believe that we should look at. Now, whilst we can debate the merits or otherwise of using animals in the past, there is a growing amount of evidence and a growing amount of consensus amongst the scientific community that we are reaching, if we haven't already reached, the limit of any potential research potential used by using animals, Mr. Efford. There has been a lack in progress of many key areas of health that all of us are considered with, including Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, many diseases, especially cancer. And animal experimentation is actually cited as playing a major role as to why progress has been so slow, due to the significant biological differences between species that prevent the translation of findings from animals to humans. I will gladly give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and he is making a very powerful presentation to us today. On that point, is it not increasingly the case that animal experimentation is just bad science, and worse still, is actually hindering the development of treatments that benefit humankind as well? So on both scores, it is something that we should be consigning increasingly to the history books.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention, and he's absolutely right. The evidence does demonstrate that animal testing has very, very little benefit. I think we're in single figures of the number of percentage points of the number of tests that have gone from being successful on animals to being successful in humans. It is a waste of money, and therefore we should be increasingly looking to consign this to the dustbin of history. And if I can just give a further example, Mr. Efford, in a 2019 study, it was found that it could not recommend any animal model that could reliably predict the efficacy of potential treatments for Alzheimer's, which is one of the largest health challenges we as a country are facing. But I just want to talk finally, very quickly, about precisely what this petition is calling for, which is a NAMS committee, and expand a little bit more about what NAMS or non-animal methods actually are. Because due to technological advancements, NAMS have the power not only to replace animal testing, but actually to improve the robustness of the testing that we do, and to provide more accurate results and be more cost-effective, because they are directly relevant to human patients. So they are actually much more likely to provide the scientific and medical breakthroughs we are looking for than animal testing is. Now, there is a growing amount of evidence to show the ability of NAMS to predict potential harms to patients from new drugs that were not identified from animal tests. To give you an example, a recent study found that emulates liver on chips were able to correctly identify 87% of drugs that caused drug-induced liver injury to patients, despite passing through animal testing. At the University of Oxford, researchers have developed an animal-free model of stroke using an organ-on-a-chip technology, where they were able to replicate the blood-brain barrier and mimic a stroke, enabling new possibilities to test stroke drugs in human cells. Without regulatory change, the government could create a NAMS committee to ensure that the UK legal framework is being enforced. An independent NAMS specialist committee could review applications for project licences prior to their approval, so that a licence is only granted if there truly is no replacement method. If the committee felt that this was not the case, they could refer the application back to the applicant and those assessing it with advice on where to find appropriate NAMS to meet the research or testing need. Now, this would help to ensure that animal testing licences, as stipulated in the 1986 Act, are indeed only granted if there are currently no appropriate replacements, and to promote the wider use and research and development of NAMS. And the NAMS committee could be constructed in the same way as the existing Animals in Science Committee, as an advisory, non-departmental public body sponsored by the Home Office. Members would be independent NAMS experts representing a wide range of expertise. Now, these proposals aren't just something that I've picked out of thin air or the petition creators have picked out of thin air. They are already being implemented across the world, and the most recent development was just in December last year, when the US President Biden signed the FDA Modernization Act 2.0, which will make it easier for researchers to choose non-animal testing methods. And I strongly believe that if the US can do it, we can do it too, and make a success of it. I do want to reiterate, as indeed my honourable friend, the member for Stafford, did, the fantastic record when it comes to implementing animal welfare reforms, including the recent passing of the Animal Welfare Sentience Act, the Ivory Act, and backing bills to increase maximum penalties for animal cruelty, and so much more. But this is a glaring omission. So I do hope that the Minister can update the House on what steps her department is taking to address the problems surrounding commercial breeding, what investigations are being made specifically into the MBR Acres site, and what consideration she has given to establishing a NAMS committee so that the UK can finally indeed adopt those 3 Rs, adhere to the letter of the 1986 Act, and move away from animal exploitation in favour of innovation.
Remind members that you should, Bob, be on your feet if you wish to be called in the debate. I'm not going to put a fixed time limit at the moment, but roughly about 6 minutes per speech should see us comfortably home, to allow time for the front benches and for Elliot Colburn to wind up. Emma, but the question is that the House has considered E-petition 611810 relating to commercial breeding for laboratories. Emma Harney.
Thank you, Mr. Efford. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and may I congratulate the honourable gentleman for his excellent opening speech. It might come as a surprise, and it certainly did to me, that animal experimentation is on the increase in the UK. As we've heard, according to the government's own figures in 2021, over 3 million scientific procedures were conducted on animals in Great Britain, an increase of 6% on 2020. And as we've heard, the use of dogs increased by 3%, cats by 6%, horses by 29%, and monkeys by 17%. 80% of these experiments on animals were for research-only purposes. Commercial breeding, of course, exists to meet the demands and needs of this industry in animal experimentation. And without that demand, of course, commercial breeding would not exist, and therefore there would be no need to have this debate. I think it's fair to say that when I talk to members of the public about this, those who do accept animal research think that they have to have it because it's the only option and it really benefits humans. And they therefore support commercial breeding for the same reason. However, I think that most of them are unaware that when it comes to treatments for humans, there is a growing body of evidence that animal procedures produce poor quality results and in some cases can actually hold back progress. Scientific progress has shown us that many assumptions that we held as common sense were wrong. The discovery of DNA and entire genomes has shown the amazing close relatedness between mammals when it comes to our genetic makeup. However, when it comes to how do these genes actually function, the internal chemistry of animals, then our common sense assumption that humans are not the same as mice, as dogs, as monkeys, as cats, or any other animals used in scientific research and testing has proven to be correct. While supporters of animal experiments will point to the successes of the development of the cancer drug Herceptin and diabetic insulin, there are those failures as well. TGN-1412, where a dose 500 times smaller than the safe and effective dose used in animals killed 5 human subjects. And Vioxx, where relying solely on its results in tests in monkeys, resulted in the deaths and injuries of nearly 8,000 people. To be of value, a research method must prove reliably predictive results. Animal methods fail to do this for a number of reasons. Major differences exist between species relating to autonomy, organ structure, function, metabolism, chemical absorption, genetics, lifespan. A homogeneous group of animals living in a controlled experimental setting cannot predict the varied human patients with their individual life histories and wide range of environmental factors. Artificially created diseases in animals in laboratories cannot accurately reflect occurring human illnesses. Common adverse reactions from humans, such as nausea, mental disturbance, dizziness, fatigue, depression, confusion, double vision, cannot be detected in animals. There have been a number of articles published in the British Medical Journal and elsewhere criticising the lack of any systematic review in the efficacy of using animals in biomedical research. In fact, a bias for animal research has been shown to be holding back progress in some areas. And we've already heard the example of the use of Alzheimer's treatments. I fear that potentially millions of pounds, tens of thousands of hours of research have been wasted in a scientific dead end. But worse than that, worse than the time and money wasted, a drug that damages animals in early tests and is therefore abandoned could be safe and effective in humans. Valuable drugs that were nearly lost because of the toxicity in animals include the breast cancer drug tamoxifen and the leukemia drug Gleevec. We cannot know how many potential treatments have been overlooked in this way. But thankfully, as we have heard, there are alternatives that focus on the human biological processes to investigate disease and potential treatment. These use human cells, tissues, organs, and existing data and technologies like organ-on-a-chip technology or artificial intelligence. Along with other procedures, they're called the new approach methodologies. By providing results that are directly relevant to human patients, NAMs are much more likely to generate breakthrough than outdated animal-based techniques. MAMs in humans relevant research is a fast-growing sector and one at which the UK has the potential to be right at the forefront of innovation and leading the way. At the University of Oxford, for example, Dr. Paul Holloway has developed a new animal-free model of stroke, which we've just heard about, using the organ-on-chip technology, who is able to replicate the human blood-brain barrier and mimic stroke, enabling new possibilities to test stroke drugs in human cells. A 2021 report by the Centre for Economic and Business Research predicted that the UK NAM industry could contribute £2.5 billion to the UK GDP by 2026, an increase of 700% from 2017. There is so much that the government could and should be doing to promote this area of technology. And I'd like to support 3 of the proposals from Animal Research UK who have urged us to speak in this debate. One is to produce an action plan for encouraging the widespread adoption of human-relevant research techniques. 2, launch a well-resourced programme of practical support and training to improve awareness and knowledge of human-relevant techniques, and provide funding to improve the human relevance of research on a scale that reflects the urgency and importance of this issue. And I would urge the Minister to take whatever steps they can to move research away from this cruel, wasteful and unhelpful focus on animal experimentation and towards a future of new technologies and research methods focused on human modelling that are better for us, better for animals and better for our economy.
Kerry McCarthy.
Mr Efford, pleasure to see you in the chair as always. I want to start by thanking the more than 102,000 people who've signed this petition, and I know that there was some anxiety amongst them that we wouldn't do justice to it today, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for Carshalton and Wallington and my honourable friend for, I think, doing more than justice to it, and I think there does appear to be a degree of consensus in the room. I hope the Minister doesn't let us down at the end of it and sort of really indicates the way forward. Breeding animals solely for the purpose of animal testing all too often condemns them to a life of suffering, culminating in a painful death. As we've heard, conditions in such breeding facilities are being shown to be unhygienic and cruel, with the animals exhibiting signs of extreme stress and frustration. And that's obviously just in the breeding facilities. And then we obviously know that the animals then go on to the laboratory where who knows what they will have to endure. I don't want to repeat the stats and everything that my colleagues have said, but I do want to endorse this point that it is clear that the 3 Rs are not working as they should, particularly in terms of the replacement of animals in testing. I don't think we are going to see a big bang moment at which animal testing just stops. I want to focus today very quickly on these 5 incremental steps where swift progress is possible. There's really no excuse not to act. Firstly, we know that not all animal experiments are conducted for the purposes of medical research. Many animals are still used in the development and testing of products like food additives, pesticides. I remember at one uni they were testing cannabis on, I think it was rats, to see whether it gave them the munchies. Well, they're based in a university. I don't think they really need to test on animals to come to a conclusion on that. So after the ban on cosmetics testing and the more recent ban on household products, can the Minister tell us what's next? Let's keep moving this forward. Secondly, the government could restrict the types of tests that are licensed. Colleagues of a similar age to me will remember the campaign to outlaw the infamous Dray's test, where toxic substances were dripped into the eyes or onto the skin of healthy rabbits. I've recently had several robust discussions with Bristol University about its use of the forced swim test on mice, inducing anxiety, fear and stress, all to collect data of questionable quality. And that does raise another point, and I think it's come up in some of the figures that we mentioned. Is scientific curiosity a good enough reason to carry out endless tests on animals when it doesn't actually yield results? Surely it should be when they are actually trying to reach a conclusion, not just, as I said, out of curiosity. Thirdly, the government could build on the success of the primate testing ban by restricting the range of animals that can be tested on. As we've heard, MBR Acres in Cambridgeshire continues to breed 2,000 beagles each year solely for animal testing. And beagles are favoured for this kind of toxicity testing as opposed to other dogs precisely because their docile, compliant nature. And then they're either injected or force-fed poisonous chemicals, then they're asphyxiated before an autopsy is conducted to assess the effects on them. Dogs breastfed for testing have also been forced to inhale pesticides or have been deliberately given heart attacks. And we've also heard that cats, horses and monkeys are still being used. I don't think any of my constituents would support the testing of the continued testing on beagles, and I really think the Minister, this is something that we could have, you know, a very quick win on this, and to outlaw that, I'm happy to, yeah.
I'm going to lay for giveaway. She makes a powerful point, especially on the sort of types of animals that are potentially using. I think it's abhorrent that animals, dogs, especially beagles and other dogs, but all horses are not only continuing used, but we've already heard the increased number of use. Like 3% more horses have been, dogs have been tested on this year, and 20+% more horses have been tested on this year. Does the honourable lady agree with me that how, with the physiology of the animals so different to that of humans, why are we increasing the numbers that we're testing on with dogs and horses? And does she agree with me that we should ban the testing on dogs and horses?
Yeah, I entirely agree with him. Fourthly, we could reduce the number of licences issued by simply encouraging greater transparency. We've heard about Section 24 of the Animal Scientific Procedures Act and how, as far as we can tell in recent years, I think the honourable member said that from 2018 to 2021, every licence that was applied for was granted. But we need to know these figures. It needs to be out in the public domain. We also need to avoid it for the purposes of avoiding duplication. And I know that commercial interests come into play, but particularly with the UK leaving REACH, the EU chemicals testing regime or regulatory regime, there's a real danger that we end up with even more tests having to be carried out where they're already being done elsewhere. And that data sharing, I know that campaigners and scientists have called for it, and it's just not happening. And again, I think the government has been very slow to respond. The Environmental Audit Committee did an inquiry into chemicals regulation post-Brexit, which was notable mainly because the now EFRA Secretary suggested that the British version of REACH should be called Breach, which isn't ideal for a regulator. But I hope the Minister can say a little bit about that. The fifth point, and I think my final point, it's clear, it goes to what everyone has been saying about the development of NAMs and alternatives, and I'm not going to rehearse the arguments that have already been made about how effective, but I've certainly spoken to how effective animal testing is as opposed to the non-animal methods that are being developed. But I know that universities like Queen Mary's set up its own unit, and speaking to scientists that are involved in that, it was very clear to me that there are people that are real experts in this field that do support a move away from animal testing and don't think that it's effective. So I will conclude on that point, but as I said, I'm not expecting the Minister today to say that she's going to declare an end to animal testing. What we want to see is the 3 Rs, which has been Labour policy for a long time, absolutely properly enforced, and I've suggested some ways in which she could make some progress on that.
Margaret Ferrier.
Effort. It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Before I begin, I would like to thank the honourable member for Carshalton and Wallington for leading today's debate on this important topic, and the 102,230 members of the British public that signed E-petition 611810, including 137 from my own constituency of Rutherglen and Hamilton West. This petition raises a crucial point when we think about animal testing. The breeding of animals specifically for this purpose may not immediately cross our minds. It is interesting and concerning that the government response to the petition did not address this point. The text of the petition itself raises an important consideration about the model used within the UK. We believe the use of animals is scientifically, ethically, morally and financially taxpayer-funded, unjustifiable. With the use of animal testing so completely out of step with the large majority of public opinion, the financial aspect, the part taxpayer money has to play in funding continued animal experiments shouldn't be overlooked. The government needs to reconsider their position on this matter. As an animal lover myself, laboratory testing of animals is an issue I feel very strongly about, as do many of my constituents, and that's why I tabled an adjournment debate on the matter just before Christmas of 2021. It's why I'm also very disappointed to see a continued lack of nuance in the government's stance on this matter. At the close of the Home Office's reply to this petition, it states, "The government is clear that the use of animals in science is justified for the benefits it brings to human, animal and environmental health and safety." I'm disappointed to be here almost 13 months exactly from my adjournment debate where I covered the unpredictability of animal testing results when replicated in human medicine trials. To have to labour the same points once again, let me be clear, it's well documented that animal trials cannot reliably predict or translate to the outcomes for humans. You would think this would be common sense, as species we are inherently different to the animals tested on. It has been shown time and time again by experts in detailed and peer-reviewed research and in relation to a huge number of diseases. Just a small sample includes diabetes, cardiovascular disease, HIV, where 100 vaccines were tested on animals and 0 worked in humans. In fact, Dr. Richard Klausner from the National Cancer Institute said, "We have cured mice of cancer for decades, and it simply didn't work in humans." Even if you did not care about the suffering of the animals tested on, which I'm sure is not the case for almost everyone, how could anyone justify the money and time wasted on seeking out cures and treatments through methods that we know do not work? Even if we take away all of the reported issues with the level of scrutiny given to licence applications, the reliability of results, the key thing that I cannot understand is why we are still relying on a legislative framework passed in 1986. Investment into research and more sophisticated non-animal reliant methods and technologies is overdue. It's not acceptable that in 2021, 161,000 animals were involved in procedures judged as severe or non-recovery in terms of harm caused. It's not acceptable that the government view this as a necessary evil. It's not necessary, and a solution just requires a little more thinking and work. I hope that the Minister will today provide a commitment that the government will look seriously at this issue and urgently publish a strategy that will see animal testing phased out and other methods better funded and researched. I hope the Minister will acknowledge that the current framework is not fit for purpose and continued state-licensed animal experimentation is a stain on the UK's reputation at the forefront of animal welfare issues. The UK prides itself, Mr Efford, on being a leader in the animal welfare space. If we do not adapt and change immediately, we will fall behind our international allies. We already are.
Tammy.
Efford, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Carston and Wallington for sponsoring this e-petition debate, but also I'd like to thank the 170 constituents of mine from Coventry North West who signed the e-petition today. Mr Efford, let me be unequivocal. Britain must reclaim its position at the forefront of animal rights protection. For years, this crucial issue has been sidelined, with key legislation such as Kept Animals and Animals Abroad Bill going missing without a trace. We cannot allow the same to happen with animal testing. Now, I am proud that our country outlawed the testing of cosmetics of animals in 1997. And although it was long overdue, this was a welcome achievement. However, over the past 2 decades, technological advances have changed the testing landscape dramatically, and so it's time that the law caught up with it. With fewer than 3 million procedures a year, animal testing is at its lowest ever since 2004, as more humane and non-animal alternatives are used to achieve the same end, and I know that many members spoke about those alternatives today. Now, as the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group of Pharmacies, I have no intention of opposing legitimate medical research. However, as the RSPCA has said, far too many animals are still being put through experiments which do not constitute vital medical research. Most concerning of all is severe suffering, whereby animals are subjected to the highest level of pain, of debility or death in the name of research. Whilst recent years have seen significant progress in this particular area, with a 61% drop in the numbers of procedures causing severe suffering being carried out in the UK since 2014, what we need in the United Kingdom is a cast-iron commitment to ending this procedure altogether. Mr Efford, the time for action is now. A generation on from the achievements of the 1990s, we need a fundamental and binding review of the entire field of animal testing. Only a root and branch searching inquiry will be able to protect animals in the short term and prevent their use in the long term, as more and more alternatives are developed. Equally, even as we set goals for the future, we cannot neglect animals who are suffering as we speak. So any review must also commit to examining conditions as they are today. And this review should include the situation that's happening at Camp Beagle. Despite the progress that has been made, I am deeply concerned that animal rights are on the verge of a dramatic leap backwards. The retained EU Revocation and Reform Bill could wipe thousands of vital regulations from our statute book overnight. This could mean that the ban on testing cosmetics on animals may be brought to a sudden end. And more of my constituents are concerned about a dangerous pattern that they are seeing emerging from this government's action when it comes to animal welfare. New laws long promised are dropped the moment the spotlight moves to the next issue dominating the front pages. And even those which manage to slip through the net and reach the statute book are frequently watered down with enforcement mechanisms that nobody could honestly believe are either transparent or effective. And all this taking place amid a backdrop where there's a fury of vital laws are due to be gestionized with no democratic oversight whatsoever. Now, animal research and testing cannot be swept under the rug any longer. So I do urge the government to seek a compassionate and thorough understanding of the science and consequences for both animals and people alike. Going backwards cannot be an option, and as science makes more and more research possible without the need to involve animals, it is our duty in this place to react and to ensure that the law keeps up. Thank you, Mr. Efford.
Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Mr. Efford, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship and to take part in this debate, which is of great concern to many of our constituents. And I'm here on behalf of the 169 people from my constituency in and around Canterbury who signed, and those who contact me regularly about animal welfare issues. I want to declare an interest as a member of the EFRA committee and also chair of the all-party Dog Advisory Welfare Group. At a recent meeting, we heard from people working for animal charities who outlined the trauma, the abuse and suffering that some dogs have experienced in the laboratory settings used in commercial breeding. It's very traumatic to hear some of those and to see some of the footage gained, often at risk to the people who take it in risky circumstances. The term commercial breeding as a singular term doesn't sound too controversial at first. It sounds like you're simply allowing dogs to give birth and animals to be bred in order to be able to save lives and then give those dogs that are bred for that to a loving family. But once you've had your eyes open to the horrific practices which operate up and down the United Kingdom, that cloak of innocence is soon removed. And I'd like to pay tribute to my friend Mark Abraham, OBE, who arranges the events for our APPG to bring together professionals from the industry and allow discussions to be had and strategies to be created, which ensure debates like this can take place with members of Parliament having the full knowledge of the issues at hand. It's important to reiterate that of the 3.1 million procedures conducted in 2021, 1.7 million were experimental procedures, often a code word for abusive practices, and 1.3 million were cases of genetically altered animals. I do want to acknowledge that there's a difference between trying to prevent life-limiting disease and experiments about whether rats get the munchies, as we've heard before, or hair conditioner makes your hair more shiny, which thankfully is against the law now. The annual statistics provided by the government allow for analysis of trends. However, I do have concerns that the current data gathering does not record the type of establishment used, as the data previously showed, and I'd be grateful if the Minister could outline if there are any plans to recommit to this type of data collection. This petition calls for a number of amendments to the Animal Scientific Procedures Act 1986. It's a 37-year-old piece of legislation. We have, of course, had huge technological advances since then. I hope the Minister would agree that it's time for a new piece of legislation which not only addresses how state-of-the-art equipment is used when genetically engineering animals, but also how technology can help issue licensing and monitor the behaviour and operations of commercial breeding, with the aim of bringing the cruelest aspect of this practice to an end. And surely, with new technology being created every day, some of the procedures which inflict the most pain and suffering on animals, such as beagles, can now be simulated artificially. Computer modelling, non-invasive scanning methods, cell cultures, to name a few, and we've heard about AI as well this afternoon. These new opportunities can surely lead to better animal welfare, which is what the 102,000 members of the public who signed this petition and many more are demanding of us. Let's end these outdated, unpopular and barbaric procedures sooner rather than later and encourage investment into NAMs, which we know is the future of medical research. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Efford. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'm here today because 3 separate constituents have come to my Friday surgery and opened my eyes to really the existing framework we have in this country, which is ethically, practically, morally and scientifically bankrupt. And we know that this petition has smashed through the 100,000 barrier. I want to pay tribute to the Camp Beagle, the valiant protesters there, who've been for 18 months outside the gates at, Marshall Bioresources in Cambridgeshire. So this is happening not too far away from here. And I was sent some footage secretly obtained. It was just a couple of minutes, so this was culled not from several hours where they can do the highlights, but from a couple of minutes. And it was really concerning and upsetting to see, as my honourable friend from Canterbury pointed out, the barbaric conditions that beagles are kept in. And my friend from Bristol pointed out that beagles, particularly, are known as good-natured animals who won't bite back, and this is what's happening. They are bred in factory conditions with no space to run around. They've never experienced sunshine or wind or rain or any of these things, no natural light. I think there were some pictures of them sort of eating feces, so God knows what they're allowed to, what diet they're given. And for a lifetime of what, I think after 16 weeks, they're only babies, they're puppies. And at that stage, they are moved on, they go to laboratories, who knows what happens, they're injected with bleach, with fertilizer, all these sorts of things at such a young age. They are sentient beings, just as we are. And, you know, this just should not be continuing. And when MBR acres, it sounds quite nice, doesn't it? It sounds like they're running around gambling in fields. Very far from the case. Every time this is put to them, they say they're fully compliant with the law, that they're a fully licensed establishment. But that law, as my friend from Canterbury pointed out, is the Animal Scientific Procedures Act from 1986. I mean, it's a different world, 1986. Even I was at school then. And how many prime ministers have we had since then? Okay, we've had 3 this year alone. But still, I mean, there was no internet then. And when people ask what is the alternative, we've heard my friend from Hull pointed out in great detail, NAMs, the non-animal route that we should be going down. There is a better way of doing this. Cutting-edge technologies, modelling 3 dimensions, cell cultures, organs on chips, artificial intelligence, all this would harness scientific progress. Why are we stuck still in 1986 when I think throw a chicken in the air by spitting image was #1 in the charts? It's just a completely different world, isn't it? And the Cruelty-Free International Pressure Group have set all this out in a detailed plan that we could have a regulator, we could have a committee, couldn't we? Mirroring the pre-existing scientific animal science committee, we could have a NAMS committee to monitor all these things. And across the Atlantic, I mean, if we look at APSA itself, that 1986 Act, it only sets out minimum guidelines, bare minimum, not even best practice for care, transit, housing, and killing of research animals. And we've got 2 in this country. We have the Marshall MBA one, and there's also NVIGO. But if we look across the Atlantic at the USA, one of the NVIGO sites in America was closed recently due to gross welfare violations. And, you know, we were told that when we leave the EU, we will level up, we will have higher standards than anywhere else. This is very far from the truth, what seems to be happening here. And I'm also concerned about the way protesters are demonised. As recently as today, You know, we have a long tradition in this country of civil disobedience, of suffragettes, all these things, the levellers, the diggers. Again, the statement from MBA ACRES says, unfortunately, extremists, including long-term activists, are coming and setting off unlawful activities. I mean, my constituent Helen Probert-Cheeseman is not what you would call a sort of troublemaker, a scientist also by training, who came most recently to my surgery on Friday. And it's not just her, Ricky Gervais, Will Young, Chris Packham, they're all on side. So, you know, this demonising of protest worries me. And the validity of animal experimentation for human conditions. I think some figures show only 95% of cases of things done on animals is translated to human conditions. So why are we doing this? All of us who are parents in this room, when our kid is sick, we don't take it to the vet, do we? It just stands to reason, I think. So, look, it is time to fully deploy NAM's technology to its full extent and consign commercial breeding for animal experimentation. I mean, it just sounds horrible, to the history books, to the scrap heap, the dustbin of the past. Just as, like, I don't know, people my age, when we were kids, used to see videos of monkeys being forced to smoke cigarettes. Now we would think that's totally barbaric and wrong. So, Mr. Everett, I will end there. After all, as Gandhi put it, the greatness of a nation can be judged by the way it treats its animals. There's a lot of room for improvement. I'm looking forward to hearing what the Minister says to fix this outmoded picture. Thank you.
This has made my job very easy. Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm delighted once again to lead from my party in this debate on calls to ban commercial breeding for laboratories and to implement reform to approve non-animal methodologies. And I want to thank the honourable gentleman from Carshalton and Wallington for opening this debate so comprehensively. Like so many of my constituents in North Ayrshire and Arran, I am one of the majority of those who believe that we need to act on what is now widely accepted and has been widely explained across this chamber as the unethical, cruel, immoral, counterproductive and damaging use of animals in experiments. And of course, we have debated this matter before, most recently, I think, October last year, October 2021. We've debated it many times, but it keeps coming back to us via the Petitions Committee because it's an issue which is simply not going to go away. And the huge numbers who repeatedly sign these petitions about this matter ensures that it will keep coming back for debate unless and until common sense prevails, until science prevails, which inevitably it must. But we need that to happen as soon as possible for a whole range of reasons, much of which we've heard today. But before I go on further, Mr. Chair, I want to thank all the organisations which have provided such excellent briefings for today's debate, such as the Betsy Beagle Ambassador for the Life on Earth campaign, FRAME, the Fund for the Replacement of Animals in Medical Experiments, the RSPCA and PETA, the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals Foundation, and a whole range of other organisations who have campaigned for decades on this issue. It is the case that animal experiments fail the search for human treatment and cures. Indeed, penicillin stayed on the shelf for over a decade because the rabbits that great Scot Alexander Fleming tested it on led him to believe that it would be ineffective in humans. And there's a mountain of evidence to show this and why we need a rigorous public scientific hearing to demonstrate this. Anyone who wishes to argue the opposite without any confidence and credibility should relish the opportunity to demonstrate this using the forum of a public scientific hearing. Now, we know that there are some members of this House and some in the government benches who would argue to support the status quo, yet in the repeated debates we have on this issue, they never seem to turn out to defend that position. Except for the Minister, of course, who has little choice. But, you know, we have MPs in this House who believe that the situation that we currently have is the correct one. But if that is genuinely a held view, then it should be able to be defended. And if it cannot be defended, then it ought not to be happening. And whilst we wait and push for change in this area, The treatment and search for cures to terrible diseases such as cancer are, according to the US-based National Cancer Institute, being lost because studies in rodents have been believed. So far from assisting and advancing the treatments for cures for terrible human diseases, which we all want to see, the use of animals in experiments is actively frustrating this end. The problem with the petition mentioning the Non-Animals Methods Committee, as called for, is the fear is that this would only be able to act in an advisory capacity, whereas a public scientific hearing would require animal researchers to prove their claims about the efficacy of the use of animals in animal testing. And this rigorous scientific hearing would show that the arguments put forward simply don't hold up to scrutiny. Now, reducing licences and the range of animals upon which tests can be carried out, that's all very well and good, and they're important steps, but we need to be much more stringent about this. The best way, the only way forward, is a robust public scientific hearing to really secure the kind of overhaul of the industry which so many of us want to see. And the overhaul of this industry, of course, is challenging because we know that interests have grown up around it which defend it, even in the face of evidence that it isn't really the best way forward, and it's certainly not the best way forward for treating diseases, nor indeed for animals. It's widely reported by experts that 90% of new medicines fail to pass human trials because animals cannot predict human responses. The former editor-in-chief of the British Medical Journal has indicated that it's almost impossible to rely on most animal data to predict whether or not an intervention will have a favourable clinical benefit risk in human subjects. And if this continues to be so, endorsement and funding of preclinical animal research seems, at the very least, misplaced. And this would very much chime with the conclusions of Dr. Richard Klausner, who was referenced by my honourable friend, a director of the National Cancer Institute, that we have cured mice of cancer for decades, but it simply didn't work in humans. Therefore, we can see that in the world of science and the pharmaceutical industry itself, it is openly acknowledged that animal models on drug development simply don't work. But we should have cause for optimism, Mr. Chair, because on the 4th of January, the current Prime Minister delivered a speech. And in that speech, he set out his priorities for 2023, and he declared, and I quote, "I want to make this country a beacon of science." Now, the UK is, of course, comprised of 4 nations, so I will generously assume, when the Prime Minister said that, he meant to say the UK and not this country. But putting that aside, I look forward to his government following good on that commitment, following the science on this issue, taking note and acting upon the significant body of science which tells us that animal experiments are not helpful and, worse, can even be obstructive as we seek to treat and cure a whole range of human diseases. And it's worth recalling the remarks of Dr. Lindsay Marshall, the UK's biomedical science advisor for the Humane Society International, who said, and I quote, "The UK cannot expect to have world-leading science innovation whilst we rely on failing animal-based research methods that are rooted in the past. Animal models are really bad at telling us what will happen in a human body." And went on to say, sometimes this is dangerously misleading. And this is despite the UK government response to this petition indicating that, and I quote, "the UK's strength in research and innovation puts it at the forefront of global science. The government is committed to supporting this science base." So if we're following the science, there really shouldn't be a problem here after we have a robust public scientific hearing. Now, there has been much excitement amongst campaigners recently when President Biden signed into law the Food and Drugs Administration Modernisation Act, which removed the mandatory requirement that US-based animal tests are used in human drug development. This is a hugely significant step forward, but animal data can still be used if those developing drugs choose to use them. there is no way round the fact that a public scientific hearing would be enormously helpful and useful as a global reference point for drug development. The 1986 Animal Scientific Procedures Act and its 3 Rs, replacement, reduction and refinement, established in 1959 for humane experimental techniques on animals, is a concept developed decades ago to benefit individual experimental design, not to address the need to understand and develop treatments for many human diseases. A 3 Rs policy, as we've heard from a number of people around this chamber, is not fit for the purpose of advancing scientific progress through a shift to innovation without using animals. There is a significant body of scientific thought which believes there is urgent and pressing need to modernise UK research to keep pace with advancements. So far from the Prime Minister talking about being a world leader, we need to modernise in order to be so. This requires redirecting resources from unreliable experiments on animals and shifting a focus more fully on superior non-animal methods which will benefit humans and, of course, animals as well, and indeed the world of science. Otherwise, both animals and patients who are looking and waiting for treatment to terrible diseases will continue to be failed by outdated methods. Is this really compatible? Could anybody argue if this picture is really compatible with the Prime Minister's vision of the UK becoming a beacon of science? This government has accepted that animals are sentient beings, and that is enshrined in law. However, it's a source of deep frustration, disappointment, concern, and even anger that this recognition of sentience does not appear to extend to animals in laboratories, which are subject to painful, cruel and distressing procedures which are not necessary, following which the vast majority are killed. The recognition of sentience must be extended to all animals in the Welfare Act and the Animal Sentience Bill, so they can be protected by the unnecessary suffering clause. The experiments to which animals are subjected are not crucial for the development of any new human medicines, so we are often told. On the contrary, these experiments are failing the search for human treatments and cures, which is shown by unequivocal evidence and widely reported in the peer-reviewed medical literature. We've heard today that the regulatory requirement that animals be used in tests before proceeding to human trials was first established in 1946 in the Nuremberg Code. Since then, science has outdated 77 years. Why are we still using outdated laws to govern human medical research practice? Where else has that happened, where there's been no change in 77 years? It is nonsensical and indefensible. Our EU partners are moving away from animal experiments. We need a rigorous, public, scientific, transparent hearing so that we can have a full scientific debate on the reasons for banning animal experiments. And those in disagreement can present their evidence for doing so in a transparent and public forum. And I keep asking, Mr. Chair, those who would defend the current position, why would they shy away from that level of transparency? And if those of us who wish to see an end to animal experiments are correct in our views and our beliefs and the evidence that is presented, it will accelerate the arrival of human treatments and cures while also freeing animals from the cruel and unnecessary fate which awaits them in laboratories. And I'm hoping when the Minister gets to her feet, she will have taken full cognizance of the very powerful and reasoned arguments made across the chamber today, and she will respond by telling us how her government has every intention of moving away from the use of animal experiments, as our EU neighbours are doing. And I'm hoping that she will mandate, and her government will mandate, a rigorous public scientific hearing on this matter, which will show beyond doubt that, and transparently, that lab and animal models are not capable of predicting the response of human patients, as well as the need to ensure all creatures are recognised as sentient beings in the animal welfare and animal sentient bills. This is what the vast majority of the population across the UK wants to happen, and it's long past time that this government acted.
Thank you, Mr Efford. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and a pleasure to follow the member for North Ayrshire and Arran, who made a very compelling case for science first, which should, I think, guide us all today. I want to begin by thanking the member for Carshalton and Wallington for what I thought was an excellent speech setting out the petition and its aims and the context in which we are having this debate. And I want to thank the 102,000 people who have signed the petition, as other members have, and the 128 in Croydon Central who have signed the petition. It's the Home Office, as a Home Office spokesperson, Home Office Minister, we deal with immigration, police, security, these issues that dominate a lot of our time in this place, and it is good that members of the public push us more to talk about animals and animal welfare and these issues, because otherwise I suspect we wouldn't talk about it nearly often enough. The E-petition, as we've debated, calls on the government to ban commercial breeding for laboratories, and the member for Carshalton and Wallington set it out in some detail. As the frontbencher in the Labour Party, I want to be clear that the Labour Party believe that the unnecessary and prolonged suffering of defenceless animals has absolutely no place in a civilised society. It's part of the DNA of our party, and the history of our party is tied up with the defence and protection of animal rights. Let's look at the Hunting Act of 2004, nearly 20 years since the Labour government ended the cruel practice of hunting with dogs. A clear testament to the progress made since the days of bear baiting, cockfighting, other awful things. 2006 saw the Animal Welfare Act, another landmark piece of legislation which put down serious protections in law for pets, livestock and wild animals alike. We introduced the offence of unnecessary suffering, of mutilation, of animal fighting, and we promised to end the testing of cosmetics on animals in our manifesto back in 1997. Mr Efford, the last Labour government, I like to think, was the most animal-friendly this country has seen, and we would want to do that again if we were to get back into government. This country should lead the world with high animal welfare standards. No animal should suffer unnecessary pain and degradation, and it's not a binary decision to be for animal welfare or for human welfare. These things can and should exist alongside each other, and many honourable members have set that out very clearly in the debate today. Working from the foundations laid by our predecessors, that's what we would hope to do. Chair, it's welcome that animal testing practices have improved over the many years and advanced over recent years, but as we've heard today, we're seeing an increase in testing on some animals, and I am concerned about the lack of transparency around animal testing project licence applications, as well as the continued permissibility of severe suffering as defined in UK law. We've heard in 2021 there were over 3 million procedures involving living animals. Of those, around 1.7 million were experimental procedures on living animals, and the remaining 1.3 were cases of the breeding and creation of genetically altered animals. Over 160,000 animals were involved in procedures judged as severe or non-recovery in terms of harms caused. Now, some still argue that research on animals is a necessary evil, a key tool for scientific process. But as times change, as science changes, as we've heard today, as views change, so too must our behaviour. The Animals Scientific Procedures Act in 1986, that we've heard much about, is now considered way out of date for modern animal welfare standards and is not properly enforced. We've talked a lot about the 3 Rs, and I won't go into more of that now. The development of alternative methods using human cells and AI and modelling techniques set out very eloquently by many members. My honourable friend from Hull West and Hessel started us off in the debate, a member for Bristol East, with her 5 very clear action points, talking about the lack of necessity for experiments because of scientific curiosity, and we've heard much about that, and we've heard much about the alternatives, and they are very clear and in many cases much more effective than research on animals. So we would ask the government as representatives of the official opposition, but I think probably much more widely across the House, to institute a comprehensive review of animal testing with a view to improving practice, limiting animal suffering and increasing transparency, but to look with a long-term objective that we should phase out animal testing absolutely entirely. The government must invest more in non-animal technologies as an alternative to animal testing. There are some very sophisticated technologies, as we've heard, becoming more sophisticated by the year, and they are clearly the future. The petition refers to licensing. It would be helpful to see greater transparency in the issuing of licensing so the public can see when and why animal testing takes place. According to the 1986 Act, wherever possible, a scientific satisfactory method or testing strategy not entailing the use of protected animals must be used. It is a requirement for those seeking a licence to demonstrate they've considered non-animal alternatives. And I wonder if the Minister could clarify how that self-certification is then evaluated and whether licensing applications are assessed by a non-animal methods expert. It is important to really understand the scientific rationale behind the application, to understand the procedures and to know that they will have the minimum possible impact on the animal in question. And I wonder if the Minister would be able to outline the steps that the government will take to review this system, to make it more transparent and to look at those licensing applications in the round. In 2016, Ipsos Mori found that 74% of people believed more work was needed to find non-animal alternatives. I'm not sure quite why it's only 74%. I suspect now it's much higher. This is clearly a matter of great interest to the public, and this place should be responding to what the public are demanding of us. And this petition and many others related to animal welfare issues receive hundreds of thousands of signatures each year, and I think we can work harder. And although I congratulate the work of my friend, the Honourable Member in Canterbury, and her all-party group, there are lots of good work that's done across this place. I think the point that the member for North Ayrshire made is that there are those people in this place who think the status quo is acceptable. What is their argument? What have they got to say? And where are they today? Chair, the government, in our opinion, has been dragging its heels on animal issues for years, and I would like the Minister to indicate when the government will announce a review to identify and eliminate at least avoidable testing and then in the long-term testing in its entirety, whether the government will commit to eliminating any and every unnecessary test and whether they can commit to that now. Can the Minister clarify whether the government is committed to upholding firm standards on animal welfare? We heard some horrible stories, member for Ealing Central, talking about the animal welfare side of things that I haven't even touched on, and of course is incredibly important in this debate. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could set out where the government's view on higher and higher restrictions on animal testing sit in relation to the trade deals currently being negotiated, and as we've talked about, the post-Brexit world that we live in. We should remain firm in our commitments. We don't want us to become more reliant on ingredients and chemicals that have been tested on animals abroad. The offshoring of animal cruelty and poor standards is unacceptable. It would be good to hear from the Minister about that. And finally, Mr Efford, the Minister responsible, who I believe is the Policing Minister, answered a written parliamentary question just a couple of weeks ago. The Home Office assures appropriate protection, he said, of the use of animals in science through licensing and compliance assurance under the Animals Scientific Procedures Act. This legal framework, implemented by the Home Office regulator, requires that animals are only ever used in science where there are no alternatives, where the number of animals used is minimum needed to achieve the scientific benefit, and where the potential harm to animals is limited. And that was pretty much a full stop. There was no, we can go further, there are things we can do, we can improve, no inch given on the status quo. So I would like to reflect on what I think is the view across the House in this place, that we can do better, we can go faster, and will the government commit to that today?
Minister, there's plenty of time for you to respond, but I'd be grateful if you could leave a couple of minutes for Mr Colburn to sum up.
Thank you, Mr Efford. It's a pleasure to appear under your chairmanship. I would like to thank the Honourable Member for Carlsharlton and Wallington for sponsoring today's debate, as well as all the other colleagues for their valuable interventions and contributions today. This government recognises that it is a policy issue of huge importance and high public issue. It is therefore right and proper that there is scrutiny of the matters that we have discussed today. In opening, I'd like to give clarity as to the government's position on the use of animals in science and make overall comments in relation to progress in this area. We all benefit from the use of animals in science. This can be through improved knowledge of how tissues and organs work to find new treatments for disease and illness, the development and safety testing of medicines before they're trialled and then used in humans, the safety testing of chemicals to protect workers and the environment, veterinary research and medicines to support animal health, and the protection of the natural environment and preservation of species. When we need medical care, we benefit from medicines and medical technologies that are possible due to knowledge gained from the use of animals in research. We trust those medicines are safe to use because of the rigorous testing requirements, including at times the use of animals. Yes.
In the opening of this speech, this presumption that we all benefit from the use of testing on animals, despite the evidence from many members sitting here to actually illustrate how the use of testing on animals, in fact, I gave 2 examples myself where the animals were used as testing and a dose 500 times lower was used on humans and it killed 5 of those humans. So I ask the Minister to go back and maybe reevaluate that assumption that humans always benefit from the testing of products on animals.
With the greatest respect, the government isn't saying that humans always benefit from animals. It is in the nature of testing that testing has to be rigorous. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it can only take place if it is necessary. No one wants unnecessary harm to animals. That is why this government has an aim to, wherever possible, to replace the use of live animals in scientific research and testing with non-animal alternatives. I think perhaps we can all agree that that is the aim. This is being pursued on 2 fronts, if I may make some progress. This is being pursued on 2 fronts. First, robust regulation that ensures animals are not used where non-animal alternative could deliver the benefits sought. And second, a strategic aim to facilitate and promote alternatives to animals in scientific research and testing. Thus, I believe we've all shared that aim of the full replacement of live animals in those areas where we can, as soon as possible, where it is safe and scientifically possible to do so. A number of government departments have a stake in the use of animals in science. This includes the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which leads on science, research and innovation, including alternatives to the use of animals, the Department of Health and Social Care, responsible for the regulation of medicines, and the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs on chemical safety regulations and the regulation of veterinary medicine. The Home Office does not itself require or commission the use of animals in science. Rather, we regulate to ensure that all proposals for work are only authorised where there is a justified benefit. Animals are only used where there is no alternative. The minimum number are used, harm is minimised, and the animals are appropriately cared for. I do reject the narrative to suggest that that isn't the case. My colleague Lord Sharp has ministerial responsibility for this work. By way of background, the debate on animals in scientific research has at its centre 3 critical strategic imperatives. The delivery of the benefits of the use of animals in scientific research, the delivery of a rigorous and robust regulatory system, and the development of alternatives to the use of live animals in procedures. Taken together, these drive the government's policy in the use of animals in science. I'd seek to focus my comments on the issues raised by many members today in this very interesting debate. If I could just make a little progress, and I will, of course, come back. The use of animals in science and its regulation, the commercial breeding of laboratory animals, and the development, promotion and acceptance of non-animal methodologies. To be clear, the UK has never, as was characterised earlier, set out to use animals in science. Instead, we're set out to deliver public safety, world-class health innovations and breakthroughs, make life-changing discoveries from new vaccines and medicines to transplant procedures, anaesthetics, blood transfusions. Indeed, the development of the COVID-19 vaccine was possible because of the use of animals in research. Thus, the use of animals in science must always be considered in a broader context. Animal research and testing is only ever a small part of a wider programme. In all of these instances, I really must make progress, in all of these instances, the drive has never been to use animals, but to deliver benefits through the justified use of animals. There is significant public concern around the ethical and moral case for the use of animals in science. Animals are expensive to use, difficult to work with, and carries the burden of regulation. And it's something that people don't like. This government doesn't like it. It is therefore not a matter of choosing to use animals, but of using the best method for the scientific experiment and ensuring animals are not used when other methods can give that information needed. Although much research can be done on non-animal models, there are still purposes for which it is essential, unfortunately, to use live animals. In many instances, this is because of the complexity of the whole biological systems. It cannot be replaced simply by using validated non-animal methodologies. However, the government is committed to looking at alternative ways. This is especially the case where the safety of animals and humans needs to be ensured. I'd like to expand upon that point as it's central to some of the concerns that we've heard today. The data from research and testing using animals has an important function in the human drug development process. This primarily concerns the safety of such new medicines. The use of animals is a requirement set by international regulators to assess adverse effects before clinical trials. Such testing is crucial in protecting the safety of participants and the public. If we were to remove the requirement for animal testing, many potential medicines would not progress onto the market, and the risk to humans in clinical trials would be considerably higher. Under the UK's regulation that pertains to the use of chemical substances, the REACH regulations, as has been mentioned by members, industry must understand the hazards and risks of the chemicals they manufacture, place on the market and use. This is to protect human health and the environment from the effects of harmful chemicals. There are some chemical hazards where there is no immediate prospect of developing a non-animal alternative that could be used as a standard test method across a full range of chemicals. These hazards include reproductive toxicity or bioaccumulation up the food chain in the environment. REACH contains the last resort principle for vertebrate animals. This means that an animal study can only be carried out once all other ways of assessing the chemical's hazard have been exhausted. The government is clear that where animals are used in science, they must be protected. The use of animals in science is therefore highly regulated. A licence is required for every establishment, project and individual involved in performing regulated procedures on animals. All requirements are required to have dedicated individuals, including veterinary surgeons with legal responsibilities for the care and welfare of animals in an ethical review body. Establishments are required to comply with published standards for the care and accommodation of all animals bred, supplied or used for scientific experimentation or scientific purposes. I must apologise for not being able to intervene. I want to be able to respond directly to some of the speeches made. We contribute to develop our approach to regulation so we can continually improve compliance with the Animal Scientific Procedures Act. We are modernising our approach to ensure that all establishments deliver strong internal governance systems and processes. If we are to achieve the benefits of the carefully regulated use of animals in science, there must therefore be a supply of animals bred specifically for this purpose. I know this is a matter that the member for Carlshalton-Wallington mentioned at his opening. Establishments that are breeding or supplying animals for use in science are contributing to critical activities to protect human health and to make advances in science. Moreover, they are operating within a regulatory framework set out under the Animal Scientific Procedures Act, which requires an established licence and the assessment of their compliance. In the UK, those establishments which breed animals for use in science are also required to provide care and accommodation to these animals in line with the published Code of Practice and the Act. Adherence to this Code of Practice and requirements of the Act are assessed by the regulator as part of the Compliance Assurance Programme. I recognise the strength of feeling that has been mentioned today about the breeding of animals, particularly dogs, and this elicits an emotional response, and I do understand that. It is at this point, though, I must be very clear, whilst we fully uphold people's rights to peaceful protest within the law, recent events at the one dog breeding site that's been mentioned today have gone beyond peaceful protest, and there have been criminal investigations and sanctions. The tactics of protesters have included the intimidation and direct action against staff doing their job and the criminal theft of animals on this site. I confirm that sites are regulated and regularly inspected, so we can assure you that they are conducting the work in a compliant manner, a manner compliant with the law. It is important that we agree that individuals doing legal business under an Act of Parliament made in this place should have the freedom to continue without threat. The call for a ban on commercial breeders appears mainly focused on the breeding of dogs. It is important to recognise that under the Act, no dogs can be authorised for use if the scientific objective can be preceded without the use of those animals or animals of less sentience. The majority of dogs used in science are required for the safety testing of potential new medicines in line with international requirements designed to protect human health. research using dogs has been a step in the development of more than 95% of all chemical medicines approved in the EU in the last 20 years. That's 95%. This has included medications for the use of treatments of cancer, heart disease, diabetes and specific genetic disorders. To ban commercial breeding of dogs for scientific purposes would prevent potential new medicines from being tested in Great Britain. Should this happen, safety testing work to assure public protection would no doubt be offshore to other countries. We cannot guarantee that testing there or the treatment of animals would be to the same standards that we expect here in the UK. Moreover, we may be in a position of having exported that work, then importing the testing of that work by way of new medicines. My point is that seeking to close commercial breeders is not the answer. We must continue to address the issue on other fronts. The government has been led by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in supporting accelerated advances in biomedical science and technologies. In this way, we seek to reduce the reliance of research and work involving animals and to avoid some of the scientific limitations that have been mentioned in some of the debate, contributions to the debate today. These advances include stem cell research, cell culture, systems that mimic the function of human organs, imaging and new computer modelling methods. The UK has a world-leading reputation for the delivery of the 3 Rs, that is replacement, reduction and refinement of the use of animals in science. It is a framework that is replicated from us internationally. We do lead the way in various areas, and I don't accept the characterisation that it is defunct, old-fashioned, somehow out of date. We are leading it. The National Centre receives core funding in the multiple millions, and this government is committed to investing appropriately in that centre. Since it was established, £77 million in research and £27 million in contracts has been published with a new strategy to increase the focus on animal replacement technologies as well as champion high standards in animal research. We are therefore seeking, by proper funding, to move away from the use of animals. The UK contributes significantly to the development of embedding non-animal methods into chemical testing as well for human and environmental safety at an international level through participation in a number of collaborative research and development programmes. These include with the OECD to lead and support on projects introducing internationally harmonised tools and guidance on these approaches. I'm going to mention very briefly the points raised very eloquently by various members of the House who spoke in this debate today. If I can mention briefly the member for Kingston Upon Hull and West Hessel, I agree that we must grip these new opportunities to move away from animal use if we can. We are spending money and we seek to move forward. I've just got a minute or so left. The Honourable Member for Bristol East, we regularly commission independent work. The Animals in Science Committee gives advice for the development of policy. That's very much valued. I can confirm that we have commissioned advice on the rabbit force swim testing that was mentioned among others. The Honourable Labour may want to look further at that important work that the committee has done for more information. In terms of statistics, the member for Carlsharton and Wallington mentioned that the statistics were perhaps not as informative as they should be. If I may mention that we have the most comprehensive system in Europe for publication of statistics via the Office of National Statistics. In 2021, the use of dogs, for example, decreased by 3% and last year by 7%. Over the past 10 years, advances are being made. Inspections were mentioned. There are regular inspections. The regulator publishes the number of inspections in its annual report, and we are running a modernisation programme focused in improving those inspections. The Honourable Member for Rutherford Glen and Hamilton West mentioned with eloquence her desires to improve in this area. I do agree we are a nation of animal lovers. We believe in high welfare, and as a nation we believe in public safety, environmental safety and protections of animals where possible. Therefore, in outlining the approach that we take, we have a focus on alternatives to get away from using animals. It's only when it's absolutely necessary we will use them. There are very many other very useful contributions, which it would be unfair if I took all of the time up, but I do very much value those contributions, and I have considered all of those contributions, and if there are any specific issues I haven't addressed, I'll be most welcome any letters on that I can respond to when there's more time.
Thank you, Mr. Efford. Can I begin by thanking again the petitioners that brought us here today, and indeed colleagues as well for their contributions. If I could just gently say to the government bench that this is an issue that the Petitions Committee does have to keep bringing back, because the petitioners do feel so strongly about it that they keep on asking us to come back to this place to debate it again. So it's not going to go away. And I think it's fair to say that nearly 40 years on from the regulatory framework in the 1986 Act, there was very admirable ambitions in there around reducing and refinement, but given the fact that the amount of animal testing went up between 2020 and 21, I think demonstrates that the ambitions of the 1986 Act in reality are just not being met, and technological advances have indeed overtaken events substantially since then. I do think that this is one of those issues where there is an inevitability. We're going to have to move on this anyway. The USA did it in December. There's other countries going in this direction already, and international regulatory frameworks are already looking at revising guidance. So the UK is going to have to move on this regardless. The assumption that the 3 Rs are being met, or that the search, for example, for alternative methods is being met, has just been demonstrably untrue given a lot of the evidence that has been collected by the third sector. I know the government already is sitting on a piece of work from 2014. I would just like to repeat my request for an update from the Home Office about what happened to that 2014 piece of work. This isn't just a nice thing to do, Mr. Efford. Animal testing is actually demonstrably not just bad for animals, but actually it's producing bad results, and it's bad for the economy as well. There is benefits for humans in massively increasing the amount of research and development we do in the space of non-animal methods. I would really urge the government to please go away and look at this matter again, update the House on the 2014 consultation results, set up that committee, and indeed get towards the ambition of reducing and finally eliminating the use of animals in testing overall. I beg to move.
The question is that the House has considered E-petition 611810 relating to commercial breeding for laboratories. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.